Well, it's one sheet pan dinner today. So we're going to be doing everything on this sheet pan, which is fabulous. And I know we see a lot of recipes out there for one sheet pan meals. I'm always a little skeptical. Some of them work really well, some of them not so much. This one is a winner. When I first saw it, I just wasn't sure. I thought, it seems a little unusual, but it's amazing. I think I've made this at least 5 times since I first found the recipe, which wasn't that long ago. So it's really good. It is, we are going to be doing, it's a sheet pan gnocchi with bok choy with some interesting seasonings, and super easy, super simple, not a whole lot of ingredients. So I think we're going to get started. First, I'm Judy Matusky. Thanks for joining today. I am a registered dietitian as well as a culinary nutritionist with Athens Nutrition, and I'm always here live at 12 o'clock on Thursdays, bringing you a recipe that's not only healthy, but also delicious and easy and fast. And we try to keep that ingredient list pretty short. So let's get started, because I do want to get these gnocchis in the oven because we want to get them roasting so that we can kind of finish up and not make this video too long. So I have 1 pack of frozen gnocchis from the supermarket. The brand doesn't really matter. The main thing is that the original recipe, which is really, the inspiration came from Food52's Simply Genius cookbook. Some great recipes in this cookbook. I love this one. I did make some modifications to fit more my cooking style, but it's absolutely delicious. The original recipe called for like shelf-stable gnocchis, and I was going to use them, but then nutritionally, when I read the ingredient list, there's just so much added extra stuff just to preserve them, to make them shelf stable, that I just wasn't really crazy about that. So I looked at the frozen version of gnocchis, and they're pretty much durum wheat and some ricotta cheese, and a little salt. So that's the way to go. So I highly recommend going frozen for this particular recipe, and I have the whole packet already on the sheet tray. So now what we're going to be using, I'm going to talk about these ingredients after I put this in the oven. As particularly the one ingredient. We're going to use about a tablespoon of olive oil. So ideally it's good to measure it out, because sometimes, you do a tablespoon and it ends up being 3 tablespoons, but we really only need about a tablespoon. I'm eyeballing it, so I'm hoping I'm guessing pretty closely. Then it's just a little bit of salt and a little pepper. And the ingredient that we're going to talk about once I get this in is this chili crunch oil. So we're going to add about a tablespoon of this chili crunch oil, and then we're going to just toss this all together. And I'll talk about this in a minute. So I'm using about a teaspoon here, so I'm going to use 3 little scoops here. That's going to be about that tablespoon that we need. Then I'm going to take some tongs. So I'm not going to use my hand, just because this chili oil can tend to, it's a very, very deep red. So I'm going to just toss this around, and just trying to coat these as best we can with the oil and the chili crunch. And then they're going to go in the oven. Now the oven is set at 400 degrees, so you do want a pretty hot oven, because this cooks really quickly. These will stay in the oven for about 15 minutes. Again, just for time's sake, I might pull them out a little bit early. But they should crisp up pretty well, or at least we'll continue to cook for a little extra after we, add the bok choy, but they do well. So it seems odd. I thought it was kind of odd that you would be adding, and space them out a little bit so that we don't want them steaming. We really do want them cooking and crisping. All right, so they're in. I'm going to go ahead and pop these in the oven, and so we can keep going. I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes. Like I said, I might pull them out early, just depends. Okay, so they're in at 400 degrees. We're going to do 15 minutes. Seems odd to put something frozen like that on a sheet tray and put it directly into the oven, but it really works. What's going on there is that then the heat from the oven is going to kind of crisp the outside of those gnocchis, but it's going to continue to cook and sort of steam in the inside. So the inside's going to stay nice and soft, but the outside's going to have a little crispness to it. Great. A substitute that you could do for the gnocchis would be you could do maybe the mini frozen raviolis could work really well for a recipe like this. Even if you want to do pierogies, I don't know again if they come in different sizes. The bigger ones, I think even the bigger ones would probably work, but if you can get smaller ones, that would be great. But those could be a substitute as well, and I think that would work really, 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 really nicely. So while they're in the oven, I'm gonna talk about a couple of things. First, let's go back to that chili crunch oil. And I know this isn't anything new, but it was new to me, I would say, within the last several months. I sort of discovered it and started using it quite a bit. The thing with the chili crunch oil is that there's a lot of different brands out there. And I found out that some are much spicier than others. So this particular brand, which is S&B, Chili Crunch, it says crunch garlic with chili oil. This I am ordering online. You might be able to find it at different markets, but I found that this one, I like the flavor the best. I like the flavor really well, and it's mild. It's not so spicy. One time I went and I made it with the Momofuku Chili Crunch, which is fabulous. I mean, it's got a great flavor, except that it's much hotter. So I ended up using the amount that I used of this other one, and it just turned out too hot. I couldn't even eat it. So I think it all depends. If you're buying and want to venture into the chili crunch world, just try different brands because they do vary, and some are going to be very spicy, some are not. This one is labeled mild. And it is. So that's my go-to. And the great thing about this chili crunch is that you can use it in so many different ways. It's great on roasted vegetables. We're going to add it to this little cream sauce. I'll add it sometimes to soups and stews. I'll use it as a topping sometimes just to top off maybe a stew or chili or something. It just adds a really nice flavor and a texture because you do get a crunchiness from the garlic that's in there. Okay, so that's the one ingredient I just wanted to talk about. We're going to use this again, you'll see, throughout this recipe. Now, what's going to happen is there's sort of three parts to this recipe. The one part is we sort of dressed those gnocchis, got them in the oven, and they're roasting. Part two is we're going to do the greens that are part of this recipe. I'm using Bok Choy. This is baby Bok Choy. You can use different greens for this as well. You could use, I think, you could probably use cabbage, maybe like a green cabbage cut in thin wedges. You could use broccolini, you could use broccoli, you could use cauliflower, you could use other vegetables. I just love bok choy. It's such a nice, crunchy vegetable, and it does roast up really well in this dish. Now you could use the larger bok choy, which would be a lot bigger than this, but they tend to be a little bit tougher, a little bit stringier, so we would want to cut them up probably in strips and then add them to the bok choy. Add them to the gnocchi. With the baby bok choy, all I did was I rinsed it, and you have to rinse You have to rinse bok choy pretty well because it does tend to get some dirt down towards the root end. So if you want, what I usually do is I will cut the bok choy in half, then rinse it so I can get in there and kind of rinse out some of the dirt if it is, and then drain it and let it dry a little bit because we don't want this really wet because we want this to crisp up. And bok choy already has a fair amount of water in it, so it tends to want to steam. So we don't want to put this in wet. So rinse it, dry it off a little bit, then we're ready to go. This calls for about a pound of bok choy. This was probably more like 1.5 pounds, so it's a little bit more. I think it ended up being about 4 or 5 baby bok choys, but again, it's going to vary depending on the size of the bok choy, obviously. So these I already cut. Now, I just wanted to show you, and I'll just remove these scallions. This bok choy, there's a little stem end, and sometimes that stem end, can be a little bit brown. So just take your knife and kind of trim that off. Then this is a relatively small one, so I'm just going to cut this directly in half. So the stem ends aren't really that thick or that big. This will be fine. This is fine. If I had a few that were a little bit larger, so then I just cut it in quarters. I cut it again because they're not going to be in the oven very long. It's only about 10 minutes that they go in after we take out the gnocchis. So you don't want them too big so that they do cook. But we want them to kind of retain their texture and their crunch a little bit, but we do also want them to roast and soften a little. So I think something like this size, here's one where I quartered it. I could probably quarter this one too, but they'll be fine, even if they're just a little bit, their sizes are a little bit different. Now for the scallions, it calls for 2 bunches of scallions. It seems like a lot, but it's not. They're needed. And scallions are mild. Now we've got thinking about scallions in the allium family, right? So we have our onions, we have scallions, we have shallots, spring onions, and there's so many different options. Scallions are great because we often can use, the bottom half if we want a little bit of a stronger onion flavor, then the top half raw as a garnish. We're gonna do both of it, a little bit of both for this particular recipe. And so green onions, scallions, pretty much the same thing. Spring onions are very different. So spring onions are something that we get in the spring, but they have much more of a bulb to them, and the green part of spring onions are much stronger. They're not as great to use raw. You're probably using the whole thing in a cooking method more than raw. So we want the scallions. They're allium family, super healthy. The allicin, which is what's the compound in onions, or in this allicin family, or in the allium family, is the compound that can be pretty powerful as far as the antioxidant. And there's been some pretty good research around this for, cardiovascular health as well as for cancer risk reduction. So using a lot of them is great. And we are going to use these scallions. We're going to roast them along with the bok choy once we add it back to the gnocchis. And we're also going to chop up 2 of them to put into our scallion cream sauce, which we'll make here in a minute. All right, so I have this huge bunch. This is two bunches of scallions. And now what I'm gonna do, because these are the ones I'm gonna use to roast with the bok choy, and I'm just gonna cut them in, maybe 2-inch lengths. And they're gonna get all tossed together. And this is gonna be both the green and the white. We're gonna put this all together. Put it over here with our bok choy. And then we're going to use the other 2, like I mentioned, to make the cream sauce that we're going to use to sort of garnish the top. All right, so we have our scallions cut up, and then now what you can do with this, because we're going to dress this in a minute, I just have a paper towel in this bowl because I wanted to make sure this bok choy was drying off pretty well. So let me just pull that out. So if you wanted to, you could just pretty much get these chopped up and ready to go, and then when you pull your your bok choy sheet pan out, you can just add this right on top of the bok choy, then add the sesame oil and the chili crunch that we're going to add to this. It's just, and then toss it together. I think it's even easier. It saves another bowl. You don't have to wash another bowl. Just do it all on the sheet tray. But I'm just going to toss it together with you so I can talk you through what we're adding to this. All right, so right now in this bowl, this bowl's a little on the small side. I probably could use a bigger one. But the only thing we're going to do now is we're going to season these a little bit before we put them on the sheet tray with the gnocchis. And we're going to go back to our chili crunch oil, which we're going to use another tablespoon of this. So we're using like 3 tablespoons total. 1 tablespoon went in with our gnocchis. Now we're going to add about a tablespoon to the bok choy and the scallions, and then we'll toss that around. And then we're going to add some to our cream sauce. All right, so we're going to use quite a bit. Now, like I said, I did this with the hot one, and it was just so hot. We couldn't eat any of it. It was just so hot. But if you like hot and spicy, then that's what you're going to want. You might want to look for that. All right, now the oil that we're going to add to the bok choy and the scallions is some sesame oil. And it calls for about 2 teaspoons of sesame oil that we'll toss in. I will measure this because you don't really want to need to go overboard with the sesame oil. So there's 1 and there's 2. All right. So 2 teaspoons of sesame oil. This is a dark sesame oil that adds a nice rich sesame flavor to this. And then we're just going to do a little bit of salt and pepper. Just make sure that I'm getting all these ingredients right. Yes. And the little salt and pepper to this as well. Maybe 1/4 teaspoon, not even, of salt, just enough for a little bit of flavor. And I'm going to use my tongs again, and we're just going to toss this around as best we can. When we add this back to the sheet tray, we'll toss it a little bit more, and then because we're going to kind of toss everything together. I just lost a couple scallions. As I mentioned, I think I just realized too late that I should have had a much bigger bowl because these are relatively large. But we'll do the best we can just to get these just coat it as best we can with that chili crunch and with the sesame oil. Just kind of move them around a little bit. All right. I think that's pretty good. We'll toss them even more once we put them on the sheet tray. All right, so that's part 2. So we wanted to get those ready. We'll put this off to the side. And just grab my scallions that jumped the bowl. They got out. All right. Now the third part is to make the scallion cream sauce. So as you can see, we're pretty much doing all of this while our gnocchis are in the oven roasting. And as I'm saying that, why don't we take a peek at them? Because it looks like they only have 4 minutes left. So they are crisping up. You can see it's the chili crunch oil. The chili crunch is going to darken. It's fine. It's not really burning per se. It's just, it'll get a little bit darker. I'm going to just toss these around a little bit for the last 4 minutes it has. And they're puffing up. What happens is they change a little bit. So they start to puff up and then they're crisping. So that the inside is softening and steaming, but the outside is getting crisp. And the same thing would happen, like I said, with the ravioli or even with the pierogies. They'll soften on the inside, but they'll get crisp on the outside, which is really kind of fun as far as like the texture. Okay. All right, so let's get to our cream sauce, and then we'll add our bok choy as soon as that timer goes off. All right, so what we're gonna do with that, now the original recipe, again, I said I modified it a little bit, some of it just to make it a little bit easier, even easier than, it already was an easy recipe, but I'm trying to make it even easier for us, as well as lightening up a little bit. So they originally had called for sour cream. I don't think we need sour cream. I think we can use just plain yogurt, whether it's plain Greek yogurt or whether it's plain regular yogurt. I just have regular low fat, you know, fine with a little bit of fat. We don't need full fat, but, you know, fat-free or low fat. And it calls for about 3/4 of a cup. I'm gonna really eyeball it because it doesn't really matter if you're a little bit more, a little bit less. So that's our base for our cream sauce. Then what we wanna do is the 2 scallions that we left over, we're gonna chop these up. But you know what, before I do that, let me go ahead and get these, I'm gonna get these out of the oven because I think they're probably pretty good even after about 13 or 14 minutes. And I'm going to, let me just stop the timer and I'll restart it. I wanna get these in because maybe we can get this all done so that I can show you the finished product before we're finished up. So I'm gonna go ahead and take these scallions and we're gonna, the scallions and the bok choy. And we're just gonna kind of lay these right on top and then toss them a little bit so that we make sure that we have them tossed with that chili crunch that we added and the sesame oil. But they actually look pretty good. They tossed together better than I thought they would. All right, so we're just laying these right on top. And remember, the oven's at 400, so it's a relatively hot oven, and you're gonna want the tray down towards the bottom of the oven. You know, you just make sure that your oven racks are moved, or the one that it's on is it's a little bit further down. All right, so let's just go ahead and add all this. It seems like a lot, but it does tend to crisp up and it's gonna roast up. Yeah, I don't really need to do a whole lot of tossing. I mean, it looks like it's all pretty well coated. All right, so as you can see, we have this all together. We just kind of lay in the scallions and the bok choy on top. This is gonna go back in. I'm gonna reset this timer, and I said this is like for about 10 minutes. All right, so they're back in. And now let's finish up our, let me just put this in the sink here for a sec. And let's finish this cream sauce that we're gonna do. So we have that 3/4 of a cup, give or take, of yogurt, low-fat yogurt, Greek or regular. You want this sauce to be a little bit on the thin side because you're kind of drizzling it on top. So even if you're using Greek yogurt, you might need to add a little water just to thin it if it's too thick. This Dannon low fat is not Greek, so it's thinner anyway, so I may not need to do that. So the two scallions that we have left, we're just gonna, maybe just a little on the bias, we're just gonna thinly chop these up, both the white and the green. We want both. If you're a little sensitive to maybe the stronger onion flavor, then you might want to just do the green part of the scallion for this, and then you could have just kind of cut the white end into 2-inch pieces and added them with the bok choy. But I kind of want a little bit of a sharper onion flavor for this sauce. It is called a scallion cream sauce, so we do want that scallion flavor. So okay, so that we're tossing that in, and now here's where you can do more or less of ingredients. We're going to go back to the chili crunch, and we're going to add, calls for about a tablespoon. I'll probably use a little bit less because we've already used so much. Maybe like a heaping teaspoon is probably going to be plenty to add to this. And then I would just do, again, a little bit of ground pepper. Now the yogurt is going to be a little bit more tart than sour cream would be. So the original recipe calls for some lime. We are going to use the lime as a garnish when we serve the roasted bok choy and the gnocchis. But since I have the lime, I'm going to add a little bit because I think it's just going to add like a nice fresh kind of flavor. Maybe, I don't know, I cut this in half. I'm going to drizzle in at the most a teaspoon. I'm not even sure if it's that much. Just a little bit for some flavor. And then the only other thing that we want to add is we'll probably want to add a little bit of salt to this as well. All right, so the cream sauce, it did call for adding, the original recipe, adding olive oil to it. I'm not sure if you really need it because the chili crunch oil already has oil in it, and I think that adds a little richness to the yogurt. You could drizzle this with a little bit of olive oil if you felt you wanted it to be a little bit richer. I think it's fine without it, but either way, that would work. All right, so just mixing this around, and you can see this is a little bit, it is on the thicker side, even though I'm using the regular yogurt as opposed to the Greek yogurt. So this is a little bit thicker than you kind of want the sauce to be. It's gonna taste fine and great like this, but because of the way you kind of want to use it, I am gonna add just a little bit of water to this. And this is kind of more of a, I think, just a texture preference. It's fine just the way it is, but all right, yeah, so we just thinned this down. You can see it just kind of got a little bit creamier, a little bit thinner, a little more to the texture we want. All right, so this is gonna be on top. Now I have done this, the last time I made this, I didn't have yogurt, and I had made up just a buttermilk, an herby buttermilk ranch kind of dressing that I had in the refrigerator, and I added some chopped scallions to it, and I used that instead, and it was great. It was great. That added the creaminess, because what this sort of simple genius recipe from Food52 has created is such an interesting, not only interesting texture, but interesting flavor. So you kind of getting a little bit of that, a little crunchiness on the gnocchis, but also soft and tender inside. And then you're going to get a little bit of crunch from the bok choy, but also again a little softness as it roasts in the oven. And then here's going to add a little creamy texture. And then at the end, the way we'll garnish, and let me just double check here and see where we are. And the way we're going to garnish it will be with just a few little additions. And it's so easy, and I think this would be a great crowd pleaser for anyone that you're serving this to. Nutritionally too, bok choy is great. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it is a great source of calcium. Something we probably aren't thinking about, but it is. So if you're vegetarian or don't include dairy in your diet and you're always a little bit low on calcium, which most women are, and even if you're not a vegetarian, most of us don't get enough calcium, but bok choy is a really good source of calcium. So it's a nice addition. You can braise it and stir fry it and use it in a lot of different ways, but this to me is just one of my favorite ways to make it. All right, so let's just take a peek here. We're getting pretty close. Let me just pull this out. I'm just going to show you. You can kind of see, if you can, that the bok choy leaves are starting to crisp up here, that they're roasting in the oven. This isn't quite done, but I'm going to pull it. It probably needs a few more minutes, but let me pull it, and I'm going to show you. So what you'll do with the garnish is you're going to use this little cream sauce. What I do is, because we don't usually eat the whole sheet tray at one serving, so what I do is kind of serve it, put it in one plate to serve it, and then I'll drizzle it with the cream sauce, just a little drizzle on top of the portion that we're eating. I don't put it over the whole thing because if you want to reheat it, it does reheat really well. I would hold on using the cream sauce, though, on the part that you're going to save. Put it in your refrigerator, but then when you want to reheat it, get a nice big skillet, nonstick skillet, put a little bit of olive oil on the bottom, and then crisp it back up again, and it's really good. And then I would add the cream sauce. So just add the cream sauce to what you're serving. And then it's just some fun garnishes. So, you know, if you have sesame seeds, which I almost always have sesame seeds in my pantry, then you're just gonna, you know, top it all with some sesame seeds. And then when you go to serve it, you can serve it with a little wedge of lime, you know, on the plate, so that you can drizzle a little bit of lime. That gives, again, you know, lime, just a little acidity is always good to most dishes. So that would go with it. The other thing that you could have done, which I did not do, if you wanted to save some of those greens, the green part of the scallions, and chop them up, then you could just kind of just top that with the scallions. So the garnishing really is the scallion cream sauce on top, maybe a little squeeze of lemon, but that can kind of go on the plate, sprinkle of those sesame seeds, and then if you had the scallion, green scallion tops, the fresh green scallions. So you're kind of using these scallions on, you know, 3 different ways, right? So it's a fun way to kind of use up a vegetable in a lot of different ways, because it adds interesting flavor and texture in, you know, 3 different versions. All right, so this is what it looks like. It does make quite a bit. It's going to serve, I would say, at least, you know, 4 people, maybe 6, depending on the serving size. I'm going to put this back in the oven so that it can finish up. It probably has at least another 5 minutes to go. Share the recipe. Share this if you try it and you love it. Please share it. You know, always watch and share and like and share our videos to as many people that you can. We really do appreciate that. Always ask us questions. We're here for you if you have any questions, particularly in this type of cooking that we do, which is, you know, a little bit lighter, but also trying to keep things fresh and light, but also certainly delicious. Again, Judy Matussi with Athens Nutrition. Thanks again for joining today, and I will see you next week. I think I'm going to do another sheet pan meal for you, or dinner for you. Well, actually, any of these are breakfast, lunch, or dinner, right? They can be any meal, but I'm going to bring another one to you next week. Stay well until then. Bye-bye.